January 30th, 1944, Anzio Beachhead, Italy. An unprecedented scene was unfolding on the Italian coast. German hauptmann Werner Hoffmann's hand trembled as he pressed against the steel wall of his command bunker, stunned beyond composure by what he had just witnessed. He wrote in his diary, "The Americans possess artillery of unimaginable power. Bunker Louisa no longer exists. 4 feet of reinforced concrete, gone in an instant." Through smoke and dust, he could see the crater where the strong point had stood for 8 months, erased from existence by a single round from an American super heavy gun. 32 men of the 3rd Panzer Grenadier Division had vanished along with tons of concrete and steel, leaving nothing behind. The weapon responsible was the M1 240mm howitzer, making its combat debut with the 697th Field Artillery Battalion. Hoffmann and thousands of German defenders would discover in the coming months that every assumption about fortification warfare had become obsolete overnight. The United States Army had deployed a weapon that could transform the strongest bunker into a tomb with mathematical precision, changing warfare forever. The M1 240mm howitzer was born from a 1940 U.S. Army Ordnance study that reached a stark conclusion about existing artillery capabilities. Existing American artillery could not defeat modern European fortifications, and the largest gun available could damage, but not reliably destroy reinforced concrete bunkers. The specifications demanded seemed impossible: a mobile weapon firing a 360-pound shell over 14 miles with accuracy to hit individual bunkers. The weapon had to penetrate 6 feet of reinforced concrete while remaining transportable by standard military vehicles, unlike the massive railway guns of the previous war. Design work began in 1941 at the Fortifications, where chief designer Karl Swanson faced the core challenge of the barrel construction. The 240mm caliber meant the barrel had to withstand enormous chamber pressure while maintaining accuracy at extreme range. The solution was an interrupted screw breech with wire wound construction, a technique borrowed from naval guns that allowed strength while reducing weight. The carriage was equally an engineering marvel, designed to absorb the recoil of a gun firing 360-pound shells while remaining road transportable. The complete system weighed 64,000 pounds in combat configuration, yet could be towed on roads at 25 miles per hour by dedicated prime movers. Initial testing in May 1940 revealed problems. The recoil system overheated during sustained fire, and the carriage developed cracks after repeated firing. Engineers spent 6 months redesigning the hydraulic recoil mechanism, increasing cooling capacity and reinforcing critical structural points throughout the carriage. By November 1942, the weapon passed all acceptance tests, and production contracts were awarded to Fortifications and South Chicago Forging Company. By late 1943, the first production guns were delivered to the Army, with final production totaling 315 units at approximately $380,000 each. The M1 240mm howitzer's first combat deployment occurred on January 30th, 1944, at the Anzio Beachhead in Italy. The 697th Field Artillery Battalion was tasked with destroying the German bunker network that had been blocking the Allied breakout from the beachhead. The first round was fired at 10:43 in the morning, targeting the bunker codenamed Louisa, and observers reported a direct hit on the first attempt. The second round confirmed the hit, and the third round erased the bunker from view entirely, demonstrating the devastating power of the new weapon. Over the next 72 hours, the battalion fired 147 rounds, destroying 11 German defensive positions across the Anzio perimeter. German commanders at Anzio were in shock, as their bunkers built to the highest specifications had been systematically eliminated one by one with devastating precision. The Anzio campaign revealed 3 capabilities of the 240mm howitzer: range, accuracy, and power sufficient to destroy the most formidable defensive positions. The combination of all 3 capabilities was unprecedented in military history, and would reshape the conduct of siege warfare across the European theater. The Cassino battle brought the 240mm howitzer to center stage as the Germans had built the Gustav Line into Europe's strongest defensive system. The Benedictine monastery atop Cassino Hill provided unparalleled observation advantage, while the stone buildings below had been converted into impregnable strong points. On February 15, 1944, Allied bombers reduced the monastery to rubble, but the Germans instead used the ruins to construct even more difficult defenses. Ground commanders realized they needed a different weapon entirely, and 5th Army Commander Lieutenant General Mark Clark requested all available 240mm howitzers. By early March, 3 battalions were in position: the 697th, 272nd, and 528th Field Artillery battalions with 12 guns total. The bombardment began on March 15th as part of Operation Dickens, with 240mm howitzers assigned specific fortified buildings that smaller guns could not destroy. The results were astonishing. The 697th Battalion destroyed 23 fortified strongpoints in just 48 hours of concentrated fire. The 528th Battalion put shells through the roofs of specific buildings, eliminating interior garrisons without damaging adjacent structures. This precision had previously been achievable only by naval guns at much closer ranges, marking a fundamental shift in land warfare capabilities. A captured German officer shook his head in disbelief during interrogation, saying their shells penetrated 3 feet of stone wall like it was paper. The Battle of Cassino continued through May, with 240mm howitzers systematically destroying German defenses until Polish forces captured the monastery ruins on May 18th. After the Normandy landings, 240mm howitzers advanced with the Allies eastward, destroying fortified villages during the Falaise Pocket Battle. But their most important contribution came at the Siegfried Line, the defensive network the Germans had spent 6 years building across 390 miles. The Siegfried Line contained over 18,000 bunkers, anti-tank obstacles, and underground command posts, and German propaganda called it an impregnable barrier. In September 1944, as Allied forces approached the Siegfried Line, German defenders were confident in their fortified positions with walls 6 feet thick. Then the 240mm howitzers opened fire, and the 697th Field Artillery Battalion first engaged Siegfried Line bunkers on October 10th. The first shell struck the bunker face, producing a massive cloud of smoke and dust, and when it cleared, observers saw a hole through 6 feet of concrete. By late October, 3 240mm howitzer battalions were operating against the Siegfried Line with refined tactics and devastating efficiency. Observers identified targets, the fire direction center calculated firing data, and the first round was typically fired within 8 minutes of the request. First round hit rate reached an astonishing 42%, unheard of for ultra-long-range artillery, and by the third round targets were almost always destroyed. German defenders on the Siegfried Line experienced psychological collapse as bunker after bunker was systematically destroyed by the devastating precision fire. A German sergeant major recalled regular artillery we could endure, but those monster shells broke our spirit, and many men chose to end their lives rather than wait. The M1 240mm howitzer was part of an Allied super-heavy artillery force, but American industrial capacity made the decisive difference. Comparative figures showed American production of 315 units versus British 36, Soviet 47, and German railway guns only 8. The American advantage lay not just in quantity, but in mobility and sustained operations, as the M1 could be towed by tracked vehicles that had placed anywhere. British observers consistently praised American super-heavy artillery, with Major General Sidney Kirkman writing that the 240mm achieved what British heavy guns could not. As Allied forces drove into Germany proper in early 1945, every city designated a fortress by Hitler faced systematic bombardment by super-heavy artillery. The siege of Aschaffenburg from March 25 to April 3 demonstrated the weapon's urban warfare capabilities against a medieval city fortified by the 36th Infantry Division. The 265th Field Artillery Battalion positioned for howitzers and systematically destroyed defensive positions with remarkable precision through the city's streets. Forward observers could place rounds through specific buildings without damaging adjacent structures, convincing many German commanders to surrender rather than see their cities leveled. The capture of Nuremberg from April 16th to 20th saw three 240mm battalions in action against medieval fortifications reinforced with modern concrete. The 698th Field Artillery Battalion destroyed 8 major bunkers in the old city walls in just 4 hours of firing on April 19th. When Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, American 240mm howitzers had made a decisive contribution to Allied victory in Europe. Final statistics from U.S. Army Ordnance showed 118,429 rounds fired in the European theater of operations. 3,847 bunkers and fortifications were engaged, with 3,114 confirmed destroyed, an 81% destruction rate. The human cost inflicted by 240mm fire is harder to quantify, with German records suggesting 15,000 to 20,000 casualties directly from bombardment. Combat experience led to continuous improvements, as experienced crews reduced setup time from 8 hours to under 4 hours through improved procedures and equipment. Mechanical fuse setters increased the rate of fire from 1 round per 3 minutes to 1 per 2 minutes, while improved powder extended barrel life from 500 to 800 rounds. The most significant innovation was integrating photo reconnaissance with fire planning, providing observers with annotated aerial photographs of every potential target. This integration reduced mission processing time from 10 minutes to under 4, making the 240mm howitzer even more responsive to tactical needs. Military historians consider the M1 240mm howitzer a revolutionary weapon that fundamentally changed siege warfare and rendered traditional fortifications obsolete. Soviet observers were particularly impressed after examining destroyed Siegfried Line bunkers, with Marshal Kuike OV commenting that one American gun achieved what 100 Soviet guns could not. The terror inspired by 240mm bombardment left lasting psychological scars, with the German Veterans Association documenting high rates of specific phobias among survivors. Seismophobia affected 73% of bunker survivors, claustrophobia 67%, and phonophobia, the fear of loud sounds, reached 89%. Dr. Hans Smuller identified bunker syndrome in the 1950s, a complex of symptoms caused by the sudden destruction of supposedly safe positions. American veterans also carried psychological burdens, with forward observers reporting recurring dreams about calling in fire missions and gun crews suffering permanent hearing damage. The physical sensation of firing remained vivid decades later. The ground shock, chest compression, and overwhelming sound that defined the experience of serving these massive weapons. The successful deployment of 240mm howitzers represented American industrial philosophy mass production of precision weapons that overwhelmed individual masterpieces. Germany produced the Karl 600mm mortar with only 6 built-in 24-hour setup time, while America produced 315 M1 howitzers with 4-hour setup. The 240mm howitzer program cost approximately $120 million, equaling the cost of 40 B-24 bombers or 1,600 Sherman tanks. The M1 240mm howitzer's influence extended beyond World War II, as its success demonstrated the value of super heavy mobile artillery for future conflicts. Several M1 howitzers survive as monuments, including serial number 14 at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, which fired the first combat round at Anzio. The M1 240mm howitzer achieved something rare in military history. It rendered an entire category of military architecture obsolete in just 18 months of combat. General Dwight Eisenhower wrote that the 240mm howitzer gave the ability to crack any defensive position quickly and economically, saving thousands of Allied lives. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring offered the enemy's perspective the American 240mm gun was a weapon against which we had no answer. Behind the statistics were individual soldiers whose service brought victory, their stories preserved in unit histories and personal memoirs that humanized the mechanical destruction. Sergeant David Mathis served from Anzio through the war's end, participating in the destruction of over 100 enemy positions with the 697th Field Artillery Battalion. Lieutenant Harold Sanders directed fire during the Normandy breakout, his forward observer team spending 73 consecutive days in combat, destroying 31 German strong points. The 240mm was our ace in the hole, Sanders recalled. When nothing else worked, we could reach out and touch them, saving American lives. German tactical doctrine evolved rapidly in response to 240mm bombardment, though no truly effective countermeasure ever emerged against the devastating precision. The German 7th Army's December 1944 directive stated that fixed fortifications must be abandoned when American super heavy artillery is present. This represented a complete reversal of German defensive doctrine developed over decades, as the Prussian tradition of elaborate field fortifications crumbled before American firepower. Some German innovations showed promise: dummy positions heated to simulate occupation, smoke generators to obscure observation, and electronic jamming to disrupt communications. General Hasso von Mantefuel summarized German frustration: we could accept being outproduced, but the precision of their heavy artillery made every defensive position vulnerable. Operating 240mm howitzers extracted a price from American forces as well, with 90% of veterans suffering significant hearing loss. Forward observers suffered the highest casualty rates of any artillery specialty, with a 58% casualty rate among the 227 trained observers. A premature detonation near Prum on March 3, 1945 killed 5 crew members, revealing a faulty fuse that led to improved quality control procedures. The logistical burden was immense. Each battalion required 67 vehicles, including specialized prime movers, cranes, and ammunition carriers, consuming 2,000 gallons of fuel daily. The M1 240mm howitzer represented American warfare philosophy at its most effective, overwhelming firepower delivered with precision, backed by unlimited industrial production. While individual German bunkers might have been stronger, American industry could destroy them faster than Germany could build them, a mathematical certainty that terrified German commanders. It could counter superior generalship with clever tactics and offset numerical disadvantage with superior training, but they could not answer unlimited precision firepower backed by infinite ammunition supply. The 240mm howitzer was ultimately a manifestation of American industrial democracy, defeating European totalitarianism through the power of free workers. Free workers in Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Watervliet produced weapons that destroyed fortifications built by slave labor, proving that democratic societies could marshal greater power than dictatorships. The German encounter with American 240mm howitzers was more than military defeat. It was psychological transformation through technological shock. Soldiers who had believed in German engineering supremacy and the impregnability of concrete fortifications discovered that American industrial capacity had rendered their entire military doctrine obsolete. The numbers tell only part of the story. 315 howitzers produced, 118,429 rounds fired, and 3,114 bunkers destroyed. The true impact was measured in the complete collapse of German faith in fixed defenses, as every shattered bunker demonstrated American superiority not just in firepower, but in industrial systems. The destruction of bunkers was not merely the pulverization of concrete, but the annihilation of everything they represented: unlimited ammunition, precision fire control, and the terrible efficiency of American industrial democracy. In the ruins of the Siegfried Line lay not just broken concrete, but the shattered remnants of Nazi Germany's military pretensions, destroyed by the thunder of American industrial might. Every German soldier who heard the thunder of the 240mm howitzer understood its terrible meaning. They had challenged the arsenal of democracy and lost. The terror would echo long after the guns fell silent, as veterans spent decades trying to process the trauma of watching their supposedly impregnable fortifications vanish in clouds of pulverized concrete. From that terror came transformation, the recognition that the age of fixed fortifications had ended, and with it, any military doctrine based on static defense. The M1 240mm howitzer had spoken with the voice of American industry, and its message was unmistakable in modern industrial warfare. No defensive position cannot be destroyed. No fortification cannot be breached, and no bunker cannot become a tomb when faced with the precision and power of American industrial democracy. The Germans were not simply terrified when American 240mm howitzers obliterated their fortresses. They were transformed by the revelation of American power. The greatest victory of the 240mm howitzer was not the fortifications it destroyed, but the minds it changed and the military doctrines it rendered obsolete. German soldiers who had begun the war believing in their technological superiority ended it understanding that they had been overwhelmed by an industrial democracy. The thunder of the 240mm howitzer was democracy's answer to tyranny, delivered one earth-shaking round at a time across the battlefields of Europe. This history deserves to be remembered, as the names of those who wrote victory and sacrifice in the fire should not be lost to time. Understanding this history means understanding how freedom overcame oppression through the combination of industrial might, technological precision, and the courage of those who served. The M1 240mm howitzer proved that democratic societies, when challenged, can marshal greater power than any dictatorship, transforming raw materials into instruments of freedom. The 240mm howitzer program cost approximately $120 million, equaling 40 B-24 bombers or 1,600 Sherman tanks in total investment. Yet the strategic impact of being able to reduce any fortification quickly justified the investment, many times overthrew the Allied lives, saved by eliminating costly infantry assaults. The fire control techniques developed for the 240mm howitzer became standard for all artillery, particularly the Fire Direction Center System and aerial reconnaissance integration. Modern GPS-guided munitions trace their conceptual ancestry to the precision fire missions developed for the 240mm howitzer during 1944 and 45. The concussion from firing caused chronic traumatic encephalopathy in some long-service crew members, a hidden price paid for operating such powerful weapons over extended periods. On March 3, 1945, a premature detonation in the bore of a 240mm howitzer near Prum killed 5 crew members in a catastrophic instant. Each 240mm battalion required 67 vehicles and consumed 2,000 gallons of fuel daily when moving, demanding extensive engineer support for road maintenance. The weapons' weight damaged roads and required engineer support to maintain supply routes, ensuring the massive guns could reach their designated firing positions across difficult terrain. The M1 240mm howitzer proved that democratic societies, when challenged, can marshal greater power than any dictatorship through the combination of free labor and industrial innovation. This history deserves to be remembered, as the names of those who wrote victory and sacrifice in the fire should not be lost to the passage of time. If you want more hardcore breakdowns of history's most devastating weapons that changed the world, smash that like button and subscribe to our channel. I am your military history observer, and I will see you on the next battlefield where the course of history was forever changed. The solution was an interrupted screw breach with wire-wound construction, a technique borrowed from naval guns that allowed the barrel to maintain strength while reducing overall weights significantly. The carriage design employed a split-trail configuration with 2 wheels on each side, opening to form a wide stable base, when firing and folding for road transport behind dedicated prime movers. The complete system weighed 64,000 pounds in combat configuration, yet could be towed on roads at 25 miles per hour by its dedicated tracked prime mover vehicles. German defenders at Anzio who had trusted their reinforced bunkers found themselves in a new reality where no fortification could provide protection against the devastating precision of American super-heavy artillery. The Cassino bombardment demonstrated that 240mm howitzers could achieve what weeks of conventional artillery and infantry assault had failed to accomplish against fortified stone buildings. The 697th Battalion's destruction of 23 fortified strong points in 48 hours at Cassino represented an unprecedented rate of fortificational elimination in modern warfare. German tactical doctrine underwent first evolution as the December 1940 directive from the 7th Army explicitly ordered abandonment of fixed fortifications when American super-heavy artillery was present. The Prussian tradition of elaborate field fortifications, refined through World War I in the Eastern Front, crumbled before American firepower as German soldiers abandoned positions they once trusted with their lives. The M1 240mm howitzer's success proved that super-heavy mobile artillery was not merely feasible but decisive, influencing Soviet development of the 2S-4T open self-propelled mortar after the war. The M1 howitzer's barrel life was extended from 500 to 800 rounds through improved powder formulation, a significant improvement that reduced the frequency of costly and time-consuming barrel replacements during combat operations. The 240mm howitzer's fire direction system processed missions in under 4 minutes by 1945, a dramatic improvement from the 10-minute processing time at the beginning of its combat deployment. Understanding this history means understanding how freedom overcame oppression through the combination of industrial might, technological precision, and the courage of those who served these massive weapons in combat.